Oh, great. Okay. All right. We're going to just wait for our viewers to start to populate and join. Um, this is our Safety for Our Sisters programming as part of our Women's History Month programming. So we're just going to wait for you all to jump in here and join. We have our amazing guests who are going to be joining us tonight to discuss these critically important issues. We're going to get started in a few as you guys jump on. Give it about a minute or two. Okay, I see you guys starting to jump into the room. We got 5 viewers. Keep people coming in. Okay. All right, waiting for the room to populate with more people, just so everybody can see our programming. Gonna get started in a minute and a half. Again, super thankful for everyone who's joining us tonight across Facebook, across our YouTube page, also across our other platforms and social media. Again, we want to make sure that we get our programming out tonight. We are doing our Women's History Month programming series. Last week we had our community conference where we spoke about women's health. Today we're going to have our Safety for Our Sisters workshop. We're going to be discussing anti-violence and tools and techniques for women to protect themselves from gender-based violence. So I'm going to give it another minute or so before we get started. Okay. All right. Thank you so very much for everybody who's here tonight. I see our viewers, our audience is starting to build up. I want to thank you so much for joining, and it's a great honor to speak and welcome you all this evening to our Safety for Our Sisters workshop. And as we all know, violence against women is a tremendous issue across our communities, across our city, across this nation, and across this world. And according to, we were just studying, was just looking at some data today, and according to the UN Women, 35% of women globally have experienced either physical or sexual intimate partner violence or violence by a non-partner. And so since the pandemic, as you guys can imagine, we've seen significant increases in the amount of DV calls that we're getting to the New York City hotline, as well as DV cases overall have increased 300% and 49% respectively as it relates to the calls and the actual cases. So we are seeing a tremendous increase in domestic violence in the wake of COVID-19. And this is in part due to restricted movement. There's a ton of economic insecurity that folks across the district and across our city are faced with. We also are dealing with social isolation, and all of this has led to an overall increase in intimate partner violence. And so tonight's workshop is really for us to get a knowledge base, tools, and a system in place for us individually and for our communities to protect ourselves from this type of violence against women. Now, just to add some more context to tonight's discussion, many countries actually have integrated prevention and response plans to kind of sort of address this during the COVID-19 crisis. And we have a ton of global statistics here right at home, and we've seen the impacts of these changes. And so we've got a lot more work to do to ensure that we reduce intimate partner violence and domestic violence as a whole. And it starts with these metrics and these different systems. As you know, our communities have also been hardest hit by COVID-19. And as you can imagine, these issues have been only exacerbated by longstanding, deeper issues that impact Black and brown women across our district. And our office is just diligently working. We have a tremendous team that works each day to ensure we're grounded in service, and we're also contributing to the work that is necessary to address these deeper root cause issues. We're going to be working to advance legislation and funding to support these issues in a comprehensive way. And I'm so honored to kind of share some of the work that we've been doing as an office. We bring resources and expertise directly to you on the issue and subject matter, and we're bringing community and we're bringing leaders and experts together. And so that's how we're going to be able to combat. That's part of how we're going to be able to combat domestic violence and interpartner violence, and we're going to be very, very steadfast in that work and in this space. So I'm super excited to be here tonight. I want to thank you all for being here for our folks who are going to be joining us from Black Women's Blueprint. And we want to thank them for this collaboration. We have a tremendous amount of folk who are coming from all across the district, all across our communities, who are partnering with this on this collaborative effort. And so we're going to introduce them in a second. I encourage everyone who's on tonight to please join us on all of our social media pages and comment. Drop your comments in all of our social media pages so our staff and our team can jump in and really share the critically important resources that our office may be able to connect you to or even offer. I'm just here tonight to see how we can partner and how we can learn. I'm going to be learning tonight just like everyone else, and I want to before we move forward tonight, I want to also just acknowledge that I have privilege my identity as a cisgendered Black man. It's my responsibility and duty to use that privilege to help be an ally to women and uplift women. In addition to being a cisgender Black male, also in a position of power, it's my job and duty and responsibility to work to uplift women of color, women of all backgrounds, and we're going to be working to do that as an office and working to hear how we can best do that here tonight. Before we move forward with tonight's event, I want to just hold a brief moment of silence to honor the life of a young woman from my district. And she was a daughter, she was a granddaughter, a mother, and a friend. And her name is Destiny Smothers. So we're going to hold a brief moment of silence for Destiny Smothers. Thank you. Now I would like to welcome Ms. Savannah Brown from Black Women's Blueprint to start our workshop tonight.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member, and to the entire team in your office. So grateful from the village that is Black Women's Blueprint. I want to thank you, Assembly Member Khalil Anderson, and also extend gratitude to Monet Schultz, Deputy of Chief of Staff. I want to thank Christina Cover also, who conducted all kinds of wizardry and magic to pull this program together and outreach to the community. And also thank Carl Valerie, who was a tremendous anchor in the programming and the design of this program. And I wish that we could hold years and months of vigil for Destiny Smothers and other women who are murdered and disappeared by intimate partner violence and by patriarchy and by sexism, by lack of protections from the police. And I do hold vigil every single day. And so I want to thank our partners in the organizations who will hold space tonight as we reflect not just on Destiny Smothers' murder, but her life and what lessons her life teaches this field and this movement and this world and the global reverberation and the impact of her life and death. And so I thank you each and everyone who's joining us live for participating in tonight's workshop and for joining us and knowing that this is not just a training. It's not just a workshop. It's not just a moment of 2 hours of talking about theory and practice, but it is really our very lives, our sisters' lives, who we are holding day to day and day to day and day to day, not just in our work, but as individuals, right? And so we can start the slides now. I want to have an opportunity to share with you one, to ground us, right? To be able to hold and facilitate this space, right? In a grounding and a practice, and also a ritual, hopefully, of self care and wellness. I'm also excited and interested to share Black Women's Blueprints model and how we approach this work. We have been doing this work for almost 14 years now. We always say 10 years, but that's just when we got our certificate of incorporation. We've been doing this work for 14 years as an organization and an entity. And to share some of the history of Black Women's Blueprint with you all. My name is Savannah Brown, and I'm the co-executive director at Black Women's Blueprint, and I am excited to just ritualize us and ground us, and set the tone and move us forward to think about the container that we are creating collectively and individually. And so I invite you, and this truly is an invitation, to, if you can, find a comfortable seat, close your eyes. And if closing your eyes is not accessible to you at the moment because you are cooking or caretaking or multitasking, or it just doesn't feel right, you can lower your gaze and slow your breath. And this invitation to ground is rooted in the notion that we come to this work as the work, right? Many of us are survivors of multiple kinds of violence and multiple institutions and systems of violence. We come to this work as the work. We are actually not separate from it. The invitation for a moment of healing and groundedness and reflection is so that we get to be in the business of creating a container and a sacred space to begin from. It's not usually on our meeting agendas to ground, to check in, to center, but here tonight we do. During this time of grounding, and it'll just be a couple of minutes, not long, think about how we're going to hold this space together tonight. What do you need in order to be held, right? You might need a cup of water. You might need to put your headphones on, or you might need to eat your dinner at this time. But what do you need, right, for the couple of hours we have together? What are some ways that we can practice self-care? This conversation is not light, right? We're talking about violence. We're talking about gender-based violence. We're talking about an issue that most of us have faced or confronted or had to be in confrontation with. And so in this time, you're invited to self-care, right? And your own wellness. You have permission, full permission, to bring your full self to the discussion. And so if you've been able to close your eyes or lower your gaze or just calm your breath, allow your feet to feel the ground, your heart to brace your spine. When we do this work, we invite a constant release into freedom and also into a knowing of what our ancestors walk with, right? This is Her Story Month, Women's Her Story Month. And so we're constantly bridging the present with our dreaming of the future and remembering our ancestors in that process and who taught us how to be in this work. And where the work breaks our heart, we can mend, right? We can mend with our practices. We can mend with community organizing. We can mend with systems change. We can mend with healing justice. For some of us, it's abolition, right? And we speak the tongues and the names of our ancestors in order to heal nations against the violence that we protest. And I invite you to just think about what your medicine is tonight, right? And the wisdoms and of the truth tellers and culture keepers that came before you. Who are they? Hold them in your heart. It could be your grandmother, your auntie. It could also be a ancestor that we all know. I'm thinking of Harriet Tubman, Octavia Butler, Rosa Parks, Reese Taylor, anti-violence activists, Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, Claudette Colvin. We hold sacred their truths, right? And the world that they manifested where they could build and grow freedom with us. In this time, as we do this work, we will be breaking silences and chains that veil our radical imagination of what safety can truly look like in our communities. A lot of us are imagining that beyond policing. And so I welcome each and every one of you into this space, and that's being called to this space, to think of it as a place of manifesting true liberation for yourself, for generations to come, past, present, and future. And so I invite everyone to just take a deep breath into your belly, big, big belly breath as we enter this conversation and we do this work. And release that breath with sound or without. One more deep inhale, fill your belly up, and exhale to prepare yourself and say, all right, I'm ready. I can do this. And if your eyes were closed, to just flutter them open, come back to the room, be with us, and make a comment if you feel a little bit better than you did when you arrived, or if you feel like you're going to need a lot more of that later on. And with that, I'd love to just share some self-care strategies for you. You're invited to engage in self-care and wellness during this session, and you don't have to have permission to do that. Do it at any time that you want. Hydrate, take deep breaths. Don't be afraid to just pause. You might have to just go on mute or turn the volume down. Just excuse yourself. That's okay. Educate yourself. You might leave this conversation saying, I want to do so much more, but that also is a self-care practice, is self-preservation. So take it in bite sizes. Prepare yourself, right? There may be friends, family, people who want to call you, text you after this and be with you, and create the boundaries you need. Oftentimes in events like this, there's often comments that come, sometimes trolls is what we call them. And you can call out against some of that, but you can also just self-preserve and be inside of yourself for mutual respect. And think about what you want to take back, right? What do you want to do to educate community? For each of you who've joined us, it's just a reminder, take care of yourself during this conversation, especially as we move deeply into the material and we hold the details of the stories and all facets of our historical and present memory with us. Just breathe, drink water, take care of yourself, and move into this conversation with grace for yourself and also grace for our collective survival. So I want to share with you just who Black Women's Blueprint is, why we're holding this space, and what we come to this work with. We are committed to and have been committed to ending rape and affirming all survivors, including any survivor, whether or not they have come forward, demanding accountability of any person who has caused any form of gender-based harm, and that includes rape. And creating the critical public space for reckoning in all of our communities, especially in Black communities, and de-siloing our movements and being in relationship to our movements beyond choosing your race or your gender or however you identify, noting that there is deep intracommunal violence that occurs that we must address. Black Women's Blueprint envisions a world where women and girls of African descent are fully empowered and where gender and race and other disparities are erased from our communities. We work to place Black women and girls' lives as well as their particular struggles squarely within the context of the larger racial justice movement and concerns of Black communities. And we are committed to moving and building movements where gender matters in a broader social justice organizing so that all members of our communities gain social, political, and economic equity. As an organization, we engage in progressive research. We also engage in mutual aid, historical documentation, policy advocacy, you name it. If it is tied to Black women's struggle, we do it. The perspective that we come from is a Black feminist, survivor-centered perspective. We are a Black feminist, survivor-centered, and survivor-led, trauma-informed organization. And what that means for us, a survivor-centered approach to violence against women is to empower the survivor by prioritizing her rights, her needs, and her wishes, all of that. And that means honoring the legacy of survivor resistance. And so we center survivor rights no matter what their stance, right? No matter where the survivor's orienting from, what their standpoint is, we center survivor rights, right? And we do that versus centering community response. Sometimes community response is not what the survivor needs, right? And so I'll just share this really short table diagram around what it means to center survivor rights no matter their stance. And that means to be treated with dignity and respect versus victim blaming attitudes, to choose a course of action in dealing with violence versus feeling powerless, to privacy and confidentiality versus shame and stigma, right? This is the approach that we take underlying in our work. To non-discrimination versus discrimination on the basis of their gender, ethnicity, and I would add to that also sexual orientation. To comprehensive information to help make their own decision, no matter their gender, versus being told what to do or increasing the risk of re-victimization or abuse. And so to all of our communities, survivors who have come forward, as they will continue to do so, survivors sharing their story creates greater risk to themselves. We know this, right? Individuals who are sharing about gender-based violence that has occurred to them increases their risk, right? Their risk in their employment, their risk in their families, their communal networks, their kinship circles. It is up to us to listen, to believe them, to hold their stories with respect and compassion, to foster environments where we can all make leaps. Because these current states of institutional violence are impacting each of us, right? Whether or not we identify as survivors or know a survivor. And we need to move toward a reality in which women, individuals across generations can see themselves as political, as communal, as personal powerhouses who we hold their safety and dignity. Their safety and dignity is paramount, in fact. And so we center survivor rights in all aspects of the work. And so what is our stance, particularly around sexual violence and gender-based violence? And from here, I'll just be very, very brief so that we can hear from our amazing, amazing collective of organizations. Our stance as an organization that has done this work for 10 years is really to see sexual violence and all gender-based violence as a form of a violation of human rights. For many Black women and girls, sexual violence exists on a continuum across a lifespan and across generations. The history of sexual violence against Black women in the US is a history also of racism that is intertwined with sexism. Addressing gender-based violence in Black communities is central to understanding how we get free, so racial justice as a whole. Sexual violence is about abuse of power, no matter the status of the person who has impacted the survivor or victim. Restoring Black men to the Black family, performing nuclear families will not end misogyny. So there's also some unlearning that particular communities have to do in terms of intra-community violence. The prison industrial complex creates more of a culture of violence. So that's a bigger conversation right now as we talk about the Breathe Act and the Violence Against Women Act and the intersection at that nexus. We should use the language of survivors instead of victims also, because we don't have to own this language that after you have survived a form of gender-based violence, you are no longer a social citizen or you're no longer a person who deserves sovereignty, safety, and dignity in your body. In sexual violence cases, we found that the primary harm doer, 96% of the time, were men. But we also know there's a complicated gender conversation to be had about the ways that violence and gender-based violence occurs. And there are many root causes, which means there are many solutions to this issue. And I'm excited to hear what the other organizations have to say about what those solutions are. I wanted to just give a quick understanding also of what abuse and what an abuser is, because I think we often get confused about this. An abuser is someone who has a pattern of isolating and controlling someone with um, whom they have regular or intimate access, like a spouse, dating partner, or parent. And really key and critical is that it's a destructive variant of nurturing intimate relationships that we all depend on. We often think of an abuser as someone who is coming from the outside of our lives externally, but often this can happen inside. And so when we deal with violence, Black Women's Blueprint has a model that we use to approach, and we call it the liberatory trauma healing model. And that model is not necessarily the model that we deal with when we talk about abusers, but it is the model that we deal with around survivors. So BWB's model and approach, liberatory trauma healing, is really about a model of preventing and disrupting harm and the effects of gender-based harm. It's also a critical method that was created by survivors to exercise their self-determination and autonomy in their leadership paths. And it's an iterative cycle. And I'll show you a visual of the cycle in just 2 minutes so you can see. One may move across a continuum, but they also might move through all 4 stages. And the 4 stages are crisis intervention, healing the self, leadership and community building, or entering back into community, and systems and political engagement. And so the reason that it is a liberatory healing model is because we know that survivors can also be leaders. Survivors can run for office. Survivors can change the landscape of their community. Survivors can build a community center, right? There is not this victim dynamic or dichotomy that exists, but survivors are also among us at all times. Some of us are survivors, right? And so naming and understanding and claiming that is critical. And so in the next slide, we show just a visual of that and the ways that that can happen in stage 1 crisis intervention. There can be over 150 consequences of sexual violence that are social, cultural, and also health. In the personal segment, which is segment number 2, survivors enter into a realm of support and are able to be held and contained to share their story. In 3, participation, survivor becomes an advocate and begins to share their story externally facing. And in 4, there's leadership, right? There's resistance, there's ongoing dismantling of oppression and dismantling of factors that even led to their violence, that even led to that being able to happen to them. And so that's the model that we use at Black Women's Blueprint. And as we have this conversation, we can go to the next slide about safety for our sisters. 3 anchoring pieces. If you walk away with anything, protect and believe all survivors. I already saw the hashtag floating around. I believe survivors, I believe women. Center lived experience. Our lived experiences inform and drive our work and the work that we do going forward, which is what I love about each organization that's about to present their work. And engage in whole systems accountability, not victim blaming, right? So that chart that I showed you about survivor rights versus that community response, that whole systems accountability and not victim blaming is so crucial. And just my last slide before I invite these incredible leaders to come is there is no perfect victim. You may not know what they look like, sound like, how they move through the world. You may think that, oh, that person who holds power could never be a victim, or that person who holds power could never be a survivor. That's not what's happening to them. One thing that we know for sure is that abuse, rape, gender-based violence of any kind impacts an individual's experience of control in their own lives and experience of their community as well. There's a number of people who wonder why survivors are only beginning to speak now or just now coming forward. It's not because they're lying or exaggerating, but they have been gaslit for decades publicly and mainstreamly. And there has not been a clear understanding of what gender-based violence is. A lot of people are quick to ask survivors why they did not run or get out or why they didn't leave the situation. There are many circumstances where immobilization happens. We have to stop the blame game. Stop the blame game, right? And we completely dismiss the effects of trauma and mitigating these circumstances where leaving is simply not a possibility. right? So victim shaming and blaming, I really want to leave you with that because that happens so often. Is one lesson or one concrete tool that we can walk away with, unlearning and undoing within ourselves, of questioning why that individual is just now speaking up or just now saying something about a violence that they experienced. And so while that in and of itself could be a 90-minute to 2-hour discussion, it's so important that I turn it over to my colleagues who come with such a wealth of experience, of knowledge, of identifying, right, where and how these things happen in community and how these things happen in specific populations, and what are the tools and the resources that are available to us as we're navigating this. And so I want to invite now Queens Family Justice Center to come on and just share with us specifically around domestic violence, identifying those warning signs, right? How do we jump right into this work and spot what's hidden in plain sight in our communities? So Denise, I'm really excited to bring you forward and to hear your voice and to have you share and shed light this evening. Please join me.
Thank you so much, Shavana. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you thank you, Assembly Member. Thank you to everyone here. I'm so honored and grateful to be part of this conversation, to represent the Queens Family Justice Center and largely the Mayor's Office to end gender and domestic, to the Mayor's Office to end domestic and gender-based violence. Thank you for your words, Shavana, and thank you for laying that foundation. It's so critically important that we all have an understanding that survivors are experts in their own lives, and it is the healing that's necessary comes not just from one area or another. It's a holistic approach to empowering, to healing, to addressing issues, and really focusing on healing for future generations and eventually the community at large. So thank you so much. Like I mentioned, I am out of the Queens Family Justice Center with the Mayor's Office, and our centers, there's 5, and I just want to give you a little bit of background as to our organization and how you can reach us. There is a Family Justice Center located in each of the 5 boroughs. And we are accessible. Pre-pandemic, we were a walk-in center. We hope to get back to that model very soon. We are a walk-in center, no appointment needed. Since the pandemic, we've pivoted to become a call center, a helpline center, with the Manhattan Family Justice Center in particular open for individual survivors who need a safe space to talk to other providers, maybe get practical assistance in terms of food pantry and other, other practical needs. So we have opened on a limited basis, and we hope to open the rest of the centers very shortly, but we are available. I will put my information in the chat, so you have my contact information and can reach out to me. To give you a little bit of background, I just want to give you some stats when we're talking and having this conversation about domestic violence and gender-based violence. In citywide, females account for 52% of the New York City population, so more than half. Of that number, 99% of domestic violence related rape victims are female identifying. 91% are DV related strangulation victims, and 87% of female identifying individuals in New York City are stalking victims. So that's hugely disproportionate. And while we do have a lot, and we have a growing number of male identified domestic violence survivors, still female identifying survivors account for 86% of survivors of victims of domestic and gender-based violence. And when we talk about domestic violence, historically, we are talking about intimate partner violence, and then gender-based violence. Sometimes there are some questions or clarity that's needed around there. And that bucket really, we're facing, or we're paying attention to stalking victims, victims of sexual assaults and rapes, also victims of family violence, and these situations where someone is being targeted specifically for their gender identification. And so it's really important to understand that while domestic violence can and does affect everyone, it is overwhelmingly female identified, and it's very important to understand the services that may be needed in order for someone to really be ready, if they are, to help this particular situation or help their family in general. I just wanted to highlight particularly during the pandemic, we have seen services, particular services that are in greater need for our survivors, that being safety planning. And as you can imagine, during the pandemic, survivors have found themselves sheltering in place with their abusers. And you can imagine the strained situation and the dangerous situation that has presented to so many people. So the Family Justice Center has a tremendous team of service providers. We work with agencies, not community-based organizations, government agencies across the city to help survivors who are interested in our services plan for their safety, have educational trainings around what domestic violence looks like, or what intimate partner violence looks like. A lot of times there's a misconception that intimate partner violence, domestic violence, is strictly physical violence. And it's important to remember and to understand that it's broader than that, it's wider than that. Wherever the power dynamic is completely off balance, where it falls with one person and not the other, is what constitutes an abusive, or can constitute an abusive relationship. And that includes financial abuse, as I might imagine during the pandemic, with so many people out of work, how the financial abuse, or how that dynamic can really be exacerbated in a family situation. Anywhere where, like I mentioned, the power dynamic is completely unbalanced, is a warning sign for a potentially abusive relationship. And so safety planning around that, also understanding that where you fall in a particular relationship, or how this relationship is making you feel, as you can imagine, also may warrant counseling service or mental health services. You add the pandemic on top of that, and it is a perfect storm of pain and fear that a lot of survivors have faced. So throughout the pandemic, we have provided counseling services to not only survivors, but to the family and children.
Did Denise pause for you?
I'm here.
There you go.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I started going into one of the other areas where we've seen a lot of activity, especially during the pandemic, the need for civil legal services. Clients who have immigration concerns, as you might imagine, there are some survivors who are fearful of leaving their particular situation, or don't know what to do because of immigration concerns that may be attached to their situation. Also family custody, visitation, child support, spousal support, all of these factors, these civil legal factors that go into, or may play a large part into someone's decision as to how they're going to navigate through their particular situation. All of these questions, maybe getting an order of protection through family court is an option. Survivors may not want to be engaged with the criminal justice system. They may be afraid to report or may not want to report to the NYPD. So the goal of the Family Justice Center is to provide an array of services to survivors so that they, in a very client-centered, trauma-informed way, can make those decisions and connections that are necessary and the best for them. So, like I mentioned, those are some of the services at the Family Justice Center, and I just want to put out there that it is all of our services are free, absolutely free, confidential, and they are open to everyone, regardless of immigration status, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identification. They are services that are available to anyone looking to connect in whatever facet of their lives they feel is needed, or all, to providers that are able to holistically address whatever is first and foremost in their mind or in their situation. Like I mentioned, we have an array of organizations, community-based organizations, government agencies like the Human Resources Administration, who do provide practical assistance. Assistance with, as you might imagine, during the pandemic, not everyone, I'm included in this category of not having technology or not being up to speed on certain technological platforms. And with centers closed, with buildings closed, that was a system that has been extremely difficult for a lot of survivors to navigate. And so the Family Justice Center has been able to help with online applications for public assistance, Social Security, disability benefits, one-shot deals for rent arrears, practical assistance that is needed, because especially in the beginning of the pandemic, with such a disruption to people's lives, those practical needs had to be and continue to be forefront in order to really focus on anything else. You have to have access to all of those other agencies and benefits in order to then focus and then move on to other aspects. So there's an array of services that we provide, and we the goal, like I mentioned, is to really approach survivors of domestic and gender-based violence to provide them with a plate full of resources, whether they be on-site or off-site, so that healing can happen, progress can be made, and families can be served and served well. So I thank you. I just want to mention just one other practical service that we provide, because I think it's important and it's often overlooked for survivors facing issues with stalking, especially cyber abuse and cyber sex crimes. There is help as well. And while this area is developing, slowly, it is developing, and there are remedies available for victims of cyber assault, cyber abuse, and cyber stalking. And so we do have, for instance, for intimate partner violence in particular, where there's an issue of or a suspicion of spyware or tracking devices that may be put into a survivor's laptop, phone. We do have support, technological support for clients who may be interested or who have fears that there may be some sort of hacking situation going on or cyber stalking. And that's something that I think is important, especially with everyone using and utilizing more social media and electronic platforms, that is also an area that is important to address.
Yeah. Denise, you are an incredible resource to this community, and also just also a cornerstone, right, in Queens. And I just want to emphasize to people, like, this is real. This is a real resource. Like, you should be coming. You use the word healing also, right? And free services, like, that is unheard of, right? So I really hope that people will come to you. Please visit the Facebook page, the website, sign up for, even if you just want to have a conversation. It is so prevalent in our communities what is happening, and I'm so glad you demystified that domestic violence looks a certain way. It can be happening in multiple intimate relationships, and so we're calling people to seek resources and also be empowered to access you. I'm going to jump over to Jahaji Sisters, but I want to make sure there's not anything left you wanted to say just to close us out.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And please know that we are here to support everyone who needs help, and we will find the help that anyone needs. We'll find it for you. Thank you.
Thank you. What a fierce advocate. I am so, so moved by Denise's presentation and just the work that was shared. And I think that what Jahaji Sisters is about to share with us will greatly dovetail off of that. And we'll be talking about the intersection of race and gender in terms of accessing resources that support women and people across the gender spectrum. So Shavana, please join me, and I cannot wait to hear your presentation. You're on mute, I think, still.
Sorry about that. You think that, after a year in the pandemic, I would figure that button out.
We hear you now, sis. Good to see you.
Thanks so much, Savannah. And thank you so much to the Assembly member and to all of the organizations present here. We partner with many of you. Queens Family Justice Center has been really a blessing for us. So just deep, deep gratitude. Women's History or Herstory Month is a month where we at Jahaji Sisters remember our ancestors and really try to tap in to their strength and their resilience. And I wanted to start off by actually sharing a poem that's in tribute to our mothers and our foremothers. And today actually would have been the 99th birthday of my paternal grandmother, my Aji. So all of my aunties and uncles and cousins were sharing her photo around, and I feel just in deep reverence to her and all of the other women who have gotten me to this day. So this is a poem by one of the Jahaji Sisters co-founders, who is Indo-Jamaican. Her name is Suzanne Persard. It's called The Unsung Ballad. I wove charcoal silhouettes of plantation cries into bodies that trembled by kerosene light. Our mothers rising before dawn's first flicker of light. Cast iron pan, tawa, chula, forming this, our Caribbean pride. My mother never started a revolution. Emerging from battles unscathed, her war cries never saw the light of day. But lovelier than any Bollywood beauty, stunning and graceful to lengths to which I could only aspire and never attain. My mother never fought any wars, but she was more commanding than any general I knew, brandishing torches of our green, black, and gold against pervasive imperials of the red, white, and blue. Her camouflaged soul bore the strength of generations. Unknowingly, my mother won every war waged, carried worlds on her shoulders, crushed empires in her stride. My mother epitomized strength in her psyche divine. My mother, her mother, and all mothers before, victorious warriors of this, our Caribbean pride. Thank you for allowing me that, and definitely, credit to Suzanne for bringing that to Jahaji Sisters. So I come to this work as a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault, as a queer person, as a daughter of immigrants, as someone who had to navigate lots of trauma on her own, and really want to be part of creating a new world where we're held with love and solidarity and non-judgment, right? And so Jahaji Sisters for me is about family. It's about the family that we never had, you know, really building that sisterhood, the siblinghood that we need to have shoulders to lean on at any point when we're struggling, to know that we are never alone. And, you know, our mission,
we were founded in 2007, which feels like eons ago now. And I hate saying it because I am definitely dating myself. But we were founded in 2007, and we're a grassroots Indo-Caribbean gender justice organization in New York City, led by and for survivors of violence. And we foster solidarity and empowerment through healing justice, arts activism, leadership development, and grassroots organizing. And our methodology is actually very similar to Black Women's Blueprint in that, you know, we meet survivors where they are at and work with them in a trauma-informed way to heal, right? And to feel self-empowerment and to really build their confidence and their strength so that they can be whole again. And then we build their leadership. So we do political education with them. We do skills building. So grassroots organizing 101, door knocking, canvassing, right? These basic skills that we need to go out in the world and lead as activists and change makers. And then we do the grassroots organizing and rabble rouse and shake things up. We rally, we march, we do political, you know, lobbying and civic engagement work. And so the methodology really is one of transforming our world from the inside out, and the self comes first. Next slide, please. And our origin story, and I want to just say a soft trigger warning here. You know, in 2007, these two sisters that you're looking at, Gayatri Hardat and Natasha Raman, they were killed in acts of gender-based violence almost back to back, within a month of each other. Gayatri Hardat was killed by her fiance, who was an NYPD police officer with his firearm. And Natasha Raman was a new immigrant to the United States. Both of these women were in their early 20s. And Natasha was looking for a home, and her real estate agent assaulted her. She was, even, you know, being a new immigrant with no connections here and not being a citizen, she was brave enough that she was going to go and testify against him in court. But before she could bear witness and speak her truth, he took her life. He silenced her. And these two things happening back to back really just shook us. You know, a few of us feminist Indo-Caribbeans in the community just felt like that could have been us. And our traditional leaders, who were, you know, mostly male, mostly older at the time, were deafeningly silent. And these were stories that were in the New York Post, you know, in the Daily News. And it was so insulting. And I just remember being so angry and feeling like, well, what are we going to do? There was a feeling of hopelessness. And, you know, when it came down to it, we said, well, you know what? If the leaders that we have are not going to do anything, we're going to become the leaders that we need. And that is how Jahaji Sisters was born. We gathered women and non-conforming folks of all ages, from ages 12 to, I think, around 75, to have a conversation about how we're going to uproot patriarchy in our community and make the violence stop. And it was unprecedented. We held it at a temple in the community, Bhubaneswar Mandir. And we thought maybe 10 people would show up. It was around 70 folks, and people cried. elders shared their experiences with violence for the first time. And you can tell that it was incredibly healing for folks, and they needed that space. It was all women too. No men were allowed, and it was like a big thing. All the uncles were upset. And, since then, we have been doing the work in culturally competent ways, in ways that are really rooted in who we are as a people, and that really call into awareness the trauma that we not only face in our own lives, but the trauma that has been passed down generationally that still lives in our bones. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of Indo-Guyanese and Indo-Trinidadians that live in the Assembly Members District. And our history is really heavy. So this, what you're looking at is a photo of indentured laborers in Jamaica, actually. And so Indo-Caribbeans, after slavery was outlawed, British slavery was outlawed, the British needed new workers on their sugar plantations, right? And what they did is from 1838 to 1917, they started importing workers from India en masse. And, no one knew what they were getting into. They were signing contracts that they could not read. These folks were illiterate. They were people that were really at the margins of society. And the women that were brought were often kidnapped. They were sex workers, and they were coming in very small numbers for a long time. So for a while, there was actually only one woman to every 10 men. One woman to every 10 men. So if you think about that numerical disparity and what it means for a woman's life, it's really scary. So there was a lot of assault. There was a lot of jealous rage, and the plantation tool, a machete, we call it a cutlass, that also became a tool for women's oppression and was used to hurt us. And I really do think that the legacy of that has been passed down and has actually, surpassed, countries' borders. Just a couple of years ago, Rajwanti Baldeo in Queens was killed by her husband with that same tool, the cutlass. And it just, it feels like, how could this be that in this day and age, in an entirely different country, the land of the free, it is happening, but it is. And the violence against women in our community is just so egregious. And it seems like every couple of years, there's another death. Slide. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about our programs and activities. So every year, for political education purposes and also for healing and resilience building, we have a 3-day Indo-Caribbean Women's Empowerment Summit. And there we use the arts, we have political education workshops, and we have really deep dialogue about how we can resolve gender-based violence. And so it's about education, but also about strategizing. We also have our annual Sexual Assault Speak Out. It's actually happening in April. So next month, I invite folks to join us for that. And we have monthly sister circles. And these are our base building events that happen. And it's often the first touch that someone has with political education. And it's also a way that people who are in immediate crisis, immediate need, voice for the first time that they need support. And then we do, safety planning with them. We get them financial resources if they need it. We send them to the Family Justice Center if that's what they need, or Safe Horizon. We also have a 7-month Leadership and Empowerment Institute, which is all about that healing and also the skills building. So it's that 2-prong approach. And we have an emergency fund that grew immensely over the course of COVID. We used to just give out $5,000 a year. Since the start of COVID, we have given out $40,000, and the requests are, just trickling in. People really need the support right now. And for us, we see it intersectionally, right? It's so important for us to be giving the cash assistance and helping survivors and, you know, women and gender nonconforming folks who are vulnerable to violence stay economically afloat, because we know that economic vulnerability is a real risk, right? When you're economically vulnerable, it means that you can rely on an abuser. It means that you may not want to leave your abusive household, right? Maybe you don't know how you're going to be able to put food on the table for your kids, and so you stick around. And so this economic element is becoming more and more important for us in the the aftermath of what COVID has wrought. We also do civic engagement and policy advocacy and rapid response work, right? So when there are murders in the community, we're holding vigils to offer space for folks to heal, doing rapid response activities around COVID, like giving out PPE and testing information and vaccine information. And the next couple of slides are just photos. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but we're putting posters. We actually partnered with the mayor's office and Save Horizon for this. We put posters on all the shops on Liberty Avenue, which is kind of the thoroughfare in Richmond Hill. And we also put door hangers with the same information. They look very similar on almost 200 homes in the area. And this is one of our young leaders giving out COVID information to folks and masks. Slide. And this is us in Washington, D.C. when Amy Coney Barrett was nominated, and we were like, yeah, that's not happening. I mean, it happened, but we did all we could to stop it, and we went with our team. Slide. And these are some of our volunteers doing food insecurity assistance during COVID. And if you see that it's intergenerational, right? We have folks of all ages, which is actually really important for us. And I think is a part of the healing when you see aunties and older people who are non-judgmental and just accept you for all of who you are, right? And this is actually a vigil that we just did last weekend for COVID victims, and the assembly member came and spoke, and we were just really grateful for his presence and his words of hope. I'll stop there.
Shavonna, you just gave us ritual, community advocacy, mutual aid, survivor leadership. I just have so much gratitude and abundant gratitude for Jihadi Sisters, and being in partnership with you is always an honor. So thank you for blessing us with the voices. I feel like you came with the voices of an entire village when you spoke today. And so much gratitude. And thank you also for leaving us on the note of intergenerational. It is going to take us all, right, to end this epidemic in all of our communities, uniquely wherever we're positioned. And so I honor you. I bow at your feet. I bless you. Thank you for all that you do. I'm going to bring our sister Kanisha in from Sis Non-Sis to share how she's doing that in intergenerational work, what that looks like, and build on what Shavonna just shared with us. So if you can join me, Kanisha, let's talk about intergenerational work and violence prevention. Welcome.
Of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Kanisha Buckley. I am the Director of Organizing at Sis Non-Sis. Unfortunately, we do not have much information or backstory because we just started March 1st. Hey, we're a startup. Unfortunately, the previous organizing home that the founders and the other members were at was extremely mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually abusive. And we deemed that as, when we realized, we were like, we cannot stay here. Our young people cannot stay here. We cannot continue to organize underneath a platform that has, induced so much harm on its, members and staff. So we decided to start our own organization, Sis and Non-Sis, that is centered around the protection, education of Black women and non-gender conforming individuals. Unfortunately, we live in a heteronormative, misogynistic, and sexist and racist dominant culture in society. So people who are a part of those communities do not have a space to feel safe, do not have a place to feel wanted, do not have a space to feel welcomed or even just respected. So we will give them that space, and we will give them a space to be proud of their identity while also protecting and educating them so that they can be even more powerful than they already are in the future. Okay, so on the topic, I actually really happy to speak on this. Intergenerational trauma, intergenerational violence against women. First thing that I want to say is stop loving your sons and raising your daughters. Pay attention to your daughters. Stop telling them that they have to be a certain way, that they have to be this way to be accepted into society. I understand that this is all that you know, but all that you know is extremely rooted in back to slavery and so many misogynistic practices. Love your daughters. Treat them the same as your sons. Stop telling your trans daughters that they cannot be considered your child because they're trans. Let them be who they are. Let them be who they will be in the future. Let them be powerful. Let them feel accepted. Stop telling your daughters to not play with trucks because it's not feminine. Stop telling your daughters to dumb themselves down so that they can be wanted by society. Let them be powerful. Let them overpower. We are everything that society hates. We are everything that society hates. As Black women, as a tall Black young woman myself, I know that I am the project that the thing that society despises most. And I love that for myself. You know why? Because I can overpower. Because I recognize my worth. Let them recognize their worth. Stop forcing these narratives that you were forced into on your children. I understand that it can be hard to follow new practices or find new practices because that's all you know. But all it takes is a conversation to start. All it takes is a conversation. Come to your daughters as a woman and say, hey, I know that I've done this and I know that I've done that. That's everything that I've known. Let me build a relationship with you. Let me make you feel comfortable. There's been too many cases where family members would sexually, emotionally abuse the young women in their families because they feel like that's only right. It's not right. Stop telling your daughters to change whenever a male family member comes around. That's not their fault. Stop sexualizing them from a young age. Stop telling them that growing their hair out long or wearing their hair straight or painting their nails, anything feminine is too fast or too grown. Let them be at peace in their femininity. Let them be who they are. In any home community, especially the communities of color, stop putting your daughters down. Stop ignoring their existence. Stop only paying attention to the sons and the men of the family. We are the ones who make the family go around because we have to, by society standards, we have to cook, we have to clean, we have to be chauffeurs, we have to be doctors, we have to be therapists, we have to be emotional support for everybody, we have to be there for everybody, but who is there for us? Who will be there for us? Who will teach us? Stop disowning your children because of their sexual and gender identities. Let your trans daughter be your daughter. Stop forcing whatever scope of masculinity you have on your daughter. She is your daughter and she will always be your daughter. She has never been your son when she realized that she was your daughter. She's no longer your son. She is who she is and she is who she wants to be. Let her be her. Let me be me. Forget all the trauma that you have been taught to force down on your daughters and on your children. I know it can be hard, but it is important to change. It is important to grow because all the trauma that you're going to be inducing in your home can have such horrible after effects. God forbid your daughter is a victim of sexual assault or rape. She's going to feel like that is her fault because she matured faster, because her body is more sexual. She is a human. She is a person with feelings. Every action has a reaction. You telling your daughter that she is too fast, or you telling your daughter that she has to cook or clean or be quote unquote desirable by the patriarchy or just by men in general, is going to make her feel less of herself. She's never going to be able to grow into the person that she was deemed to be from birth. She is who she is, and let her be who she is. Never, oh my gosh, sorry, I'm getting a bit, excuse me. Never underestimate who she can be. Never tell her that she should be lucky if somebody even wants to marry her or give her money to survive. Let her thrive. Let her be at peace with herself. Let her be who she is, not who you specifically want her to be, because she's her own person. Stop telling women that we have to be who you want us to be. We are who we are. We are powerful beings, and we will always be powerful beings. We always have been powerful beings. Every community, every subcategory of Black women, we are powerful beings. They have gone through their own scopes of trauma. They have gone through their own life stories. Let them heal. And it's important for those who are harming to heal as well, because I know that that is all that they know. We need to heal as a community. We need to focus on healing. We need to focus on breaking this intergenerational curse deeply rooted in racism, misogyny, sexism, and normalcy. Excuse me. We are who we need to be. And we will always be who we need to be. For victims and for people who have gone through and keep going and has been going through, it is important for you to look inside yourself and realize that none of this is your fault. None of it is their fault. They were born into a community and they were born into a lifetime that does not appreciate them and does not understand where they're coming from. Let us be safe in our identities. We need to be safe in our identities. We need to be secure in our stances. Because right now, we're all who we have. We need to change this narrative. We need to change everything that we've learned. No matter how long it takes, we need to change it. And it needs to be unlearned. It needs to be thrown in the garbage bin. Because as somebody who's experienced and who's gone through, it is not something that is going to, it's not something that's good. It's not something that we can be proud of saying that we've gone through. It's not something that we can say that we are proud of being in a community. Unlearn the practices. Have conversations. All it takes is a simple conversation. Protect our women. And I'll say this again, protect our women. All women, because all women are women. Protect us. And we need to be in community to protect ourselves. Black women to trans women, stop telling trans women that they are not women, for they will always be women. Stop forcing people away because you don't know how to handle it. Have conversations. Speak to one another. Love one another, cherish one another, because we are all under the same umbrella. We're all living in a racist, sexist, misogynistic, capitalist society. We're all here. And we will always be here. So let us make the most of us being here. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak my piece, and thank you so much for allowing me to be in community with all these amazing organizations. Thank you, Assembly Member Khalil Anderson, for holding this space for us to have this really, really, really important conversation.
You know, Kanisha there is a rally cry that your voice joins with women in Kenya, women in South Africa, women communities in Ghana, in Benin, in the greater diaspora, right? You have named for us not just the cultural, but also the historical sphere that pierces deeply. And the rally cry is to believe, to center, to undo, to unlearn, to untangle, to dismantle patriarchy, sexism, violence, right? The perpetuation of victimization against ourselves and one another, right? There is a cultural crisis at play. And if there was a keynote designed for this space, I think you just gave it, right? Only because you have spoken to us rawly and with great depth of our call to action, right? And that is to be constantly centering the survivor within ourselves, those who are surviving patriarchy and misogyny in these greater systems and structures against us. And that also pit us against one another. And gratitude, deep, deep gratitude for taking us beyond the moment in that way. And with that rally cry, I am really grateful to invite the South Queens Women's March, who provides an intervention, really, that Kanisha calls for, right? That is taking to the streets, that is making noise, that is denouncing, right? These violences that enter our homes, that enter our bedrooms, that enter our communities, that enter our realms, that enter all of our spaces. And so with so much honor, Aminta, I invite you to join me and to share what your advocacy on the ground to advance this anti-violence work and this rally cry that Kanisha has left us with, what that looks like. So Aminta, welcome.
Thank you. Before Kanisha of us felt that fire in our hearts and South Queen to partner.
Aminta, your audio is just a little bit, we can't hear you at all. Aminta, your audio is it's lagging and it has like a intensity behind it. Yeah, let's try that one more time. Let's see.
Better?
Maybe call in or find a way to join us another way.
And let's see what happens.
Okay. And I know that Aminta's going to test audio and see what works. Aminta, you want to try one more time? And then if we can't, we'll just jump over to Far Rock Creek.
Can you hear me better?
No, we're still having trouble with your audio.
Okay.
It has like a, I don't know how to describe it, but it has some feedback with it, and it's very hard to hear you. Headphones, let's try that. And then I'll give it one more minute, and then we may have to jump to Far Rock Creek if that doesn't work. Let's see what your headphones do.
Better.
Not at all. Nope. Same game.
Not at all. Nope.
You may have to call in, actually, for us to get the best sound from you. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna try that.
Oh,
That
that
sounded
fine. Yeah.
Better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. A little bit frazzled. Let's start all over. So I'm glad you all can hear me. Do I still sound okay? All right. So thank you, Savannah. And as I said earlier, I'm not sure if Kanisha could have heard me, but I was just saying how much of that fire I felt in my own heart, having heard everything that Kanisha said. You spoke directly to me, and I think to so many people that are tuned in right now. So, as a fellow, relatively new organization, we're really looking forward to partnering with cis and non-cis. And thank you for calling it what it is, calling our lives exactly what they are right now. Appreciation to all of you. Also, thank you to Khalil Anderson, our assembly member, and Black Women's Blueprint, and to you, Savannah, for doing an incredible job so far of centering us, keeping us grounded, and holding space in this very important conversation. So I am Aminta Kilawan Narayan, and I'm the founder and director of South Queens Women's March. And Savannah, you mentioned coming to the work as the work itself. I myself am a work in progress. I am a survivor of intimate partner violence, and I recognize every single day that I live and breathe that I'm still coping with and dealing with my trauma. Sometimes you think you're healed, and then something happens and it triggers you, and you end up right back in that space of self-doubt and pain and of a self-esteem that was torn to pieces. But as we're on this journey, we do mend, we fight, we heal, and we're doing that together. And I think we're doing that very much so. We're doing that tonight. I remember when I first shared my story with the world in writing, in a blog piece, there were folks that said, "Why did you do that for? You need to show that you're a strong community leader." And in my heart, I was like, no, I am. You're not going to silence me. I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable and to share my story, with the hope that my story can identify with so many other women who I knew were struggling and are continuing to struggle to find their peace. And so last year, right before the pandemic, we started South Queens Women's March. And you can go to the next slide. So what is South Queens Women's March? Why did we exist? So we are an all volunteer-led gender justice organization that's working to foster the empowerment of women, trans women, and femmes, and gender expansive folks through dismantling the norms, the practices, and the institutions that support patriarchy and gender injustice in our community. And we were thinking we were going to connect people in our community to the resources that they need to live healthy and sustainable lives. And then the pandemic hit. We couldn't hold our march like we planned on it, but we ended up becoming providers of those very resources. And we did that through economic development, through helping our community, our family. I misspoke, but I actually didn't, because we do see community as family, to fight food insecurity, as you'll see here on the screen, through monthly pop-up pantries that are culturally responsive in our community. We're ensuring that folks in our community get out to vote and engage in their own political power. And I want to underscore that we're just 1 year old, but we have grown to be over 50 members deep. And our members come to the work with that same passion that's often fueled by being the subjects of the patriarchy and oppression in our community. And it's funny that Kanisha mentioned that we are everything that our society hates. I remember early on in South Queens Women's March's history, which is not that long ago, a local community leader who was a community elder was telling people that I'm trying to corrupt their daughters, right? And no, that's actually not what I'm trying to do at all. Our vision as an organization is to create a world free of violence, free of injustice and oppression, a world where all people are on equal and equitable footing. And that means in the home, in the workplace, in our house of worship, in our larger community spaces. And much like the presenters before us and our community partners, we too were founded as a response to gender-based violence in our communities, and as a response to incidents, tragic, brutal incidents in South Queens. So we were founded 2 months after we lost a community member to gender-based violence. In 2019, Donna Rihanna Dojoy was brutally murdered by her husband in Ozone Park, Queens, who subsequently committed suicide. And then 1 year prior to that, Stacey Singh was similarly brutally murdered by her husband, who subsequently committed suicide. We as a community grieved, we honored their lives, but yet all at once we were feeling so exhausted, knowing that many women in our community didn't actually know where they could find a sisterhood that felt like home to them,
even amidst the resilience that they had to summon in order to literally survive. And so we wanted to create that very space, that welcoming, inclusive, intersectional space. And we are a group of survivors that realized we could not take this injustice anymore. And we wanted to dismantle those mechanisms that gender-based violence continues to perpetuate in our community. We also wanted to break down the silos that exist in South Queens for too long, right? So that, again, means creating intersectional change across race, religion, and our various identities, which divide us. I mean, honestly, have been a literal divider in our community, although we share so many of the same lived experiences. And that's very much steeped in our history. Like, I'm an Indo-Caribbean, right? And I know that those silos stem from a colonial and racist history that pit brown people against Black people. And we wanted to shift that. We wanted to organize, again, intersectionally. And so the slide's the slide's fine. But you'll know that our members really drive our work, and they are the leaders that we have always wanted to see in our community, and they're literally on the front lines with us. So with our food insecurity work, we've recognized that so many individuals in our community, so many women particularly in our community, are survivors of gender-based violence, and it's often their financials that keep them trapped in the situation, amongst many various aspects. And so during this pandemic, that's become even more of a dire situation. So we're mobilizing with our limited resources to support these individuals, even if that means doing what we can by providing them with groceries. So you can actually go back to the slide that there was like maybe that slide. So that one, yeah. So as you'll see, we're providing our community with resources in the form of food and groceries, culturally responsive groceries, also period supplies, menstrual supplies that are often the first things crossed off the list as disposable when we have to choose on our shopping list, because we have to cut corners, especially in light of the pandemic. And we're on the streets doing this work because our very model is to meet our community where they are and not expect them to come to us for resources, right? And now you can go to the next slide. We're also recognizing the need to make sure that women, girls, and gender fluid people in our community have the resources with regard to their professional development and with regard to college counseling, for instance, right? So many times in immigrant and Black and brown communities, these are resources we don't have. To be honest with you, the guidance counselors that are supposed to provide support in our local schools, they don't do an adequate job because they're often not provided with the resources. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we mobilize what we can to ensure that our people have what they need to thrive. And very, very much so that is with regard to some of the services that we're offering, including next week we're doing a personal finance workshop. Last week we did a college finance workshop. We have a mentorship series. And we're trying to fill those gaps, right? Because very much so that actually trickles in to the debilitation that we experience as a result of gender-based violence. So making sure we have access. They can go to the next slide now. So since our existence a little over a year ago, we've also been, from the very get-go, addressing healthy relationships in our community, and we've been trying to curb gender-based violence in creative ways because that's what we can do at this time. So we've been hosting various workshops every month, including healthy relationships, healing, and survivor support, addressing what it means to be in a healthy relationship versus a toxic relationship, because we know, especially when it comes to being at home, even with family members, those boundaries no longer exist, and people are struggling to just figure out how to live their lives in a sustainable and healthy manner, mentally too, right? So trying to build out what it looks like to have those conversations, how to foster self-love, how to combat bullying. Cyberbullying is on the rise, especially during this pandemic. How do we intervene when we see street harassment, as an example too? How do we safety plan during times in the pandemic? So we've been having all of these conversations virtually, of course. You can go to the next slide. Yes. So another thing we found is that a lot of times our community members just don't know about the host of services that are available to them. And there are service-rich entities like the Queens Family Justice Center. I interned for Queens Family Justice Center when I was in college, and so I know all about their robust array of resources. But I also know that our community inherently is distrustful of government for valid reasons, right? Distrustful of accessing services for fear and out of fear, a valid fear, and a valid distrust, right? So it rests on us as community, for community, to be those credible messengers, trusted messengers, to let our community know it's okay to go to these spaces, to access the free support that is available to us. But again, acknowledging that reticence and knowing that there's a reason behind why our community might be fearful. And then you'll see on here on this slide, so we are the previous slide. So we are also, again, meeting our community where they are, recognizing that it also takes men in our community to step up too, right? So although we are a women and girls and gender fluid organization, we're also stepping into spaces that are occupied by men, such as barbershops locally in our community, to ensure that they know what toxic masculinity is, so that they know they have to hold themselves accountable, because that's not happening in our community. For so long, it rests on our shoulders. We who are often the subject of the patriarchy and the oppression, that burden rests on us. Why should it, right? So we're trying to mobilize against that. So you'll see here, we've been giving out our gender-based violence resource brochure guide to hair salons, nail salons, local roti shops, local restaurants, toxic masculinity brochures to barbershops. Everywhere we can, we've been giving out these resources and coupling them with PPE, also with safe sex products, being really creative about making sure we're reaching community where they are. So you can go to the next slide. And now we also, this past January, released an interfaith toolkit to combat gender-based violence. So we know that our faith leaders are often the de facto counselors in our communities, right? We don't really have adequate access to mental health resources. They're not readily available to us, and certainly not culturally competent ones. And so what often happens is individuals who are experiencing violence turn to the community spaces that they know, and often those are their faith-based institutions. And often the faith leaders that are the people that they turn to are the ones who are perpetuating the patriarchy and perpetuating the oppression, and indicating that it is their very faith that requires that an abusive relationship continue. And they're not provided with the tools necessary to actually provide trauma-informed care, and oftentimes use the scriptures to, again, perpetuate that violence, whether overtly or covertly. And so we are trying to turn that on its head and indicate that faith can actually be used as a tool for feminism. So we released an interfaith toolkit to combat gender-based violence in our communities, and it features various scriptural passages that we were able to acquire through a lot of work with talking to faith-based leaders across New York City, so that we can use faith as a tool for feminism. And so please check that out as well. So you can go to the next slide. And every month we do a chalkback. So talkback, it's play on words. And we go to local areas on the sidewalk, and we literally just take pieces of chalk, and it's actually very therapeutic. And we write quotes and experiences to call attention to the street harassment that continues to happen in our communities. So you'll see here the picture is depicting Lefferts Boulevard and Liberty Avenue, which I believe is in the Assembly Members District. And it is the site of so much long-standing street harassment. I remember being a young teenager walking down those staircases and being catcalled by countless taxi cab drivers who said the most awful things, but all I knew how to do at the time was smile, right? I didn't know how to respond to it, to this type of violence against my person, to be honest with you. That's what it is. And so we are raising attention to that. And I will say it's so powerful to engage in this particular activity, because we are calling attention, and the very same people that perpetuate the street harassment are the ones who are asking us, oh, what are you doing there? And reading what it is that we're writing and having to hold themselves accountable and think about it, right? And we're making noise, whether in a socially distanced manner, silently, actually. And we're making sure that our points are heard. So I will also say to Kenisha's points earlier, that so much of this is about calling on community to stop sexualizing us, to stop objectifying us, to stop telling us to cover up ourselves, stop telling us that we're asking for it, and making sure that people are held accountable, right? And being the leaders that we wanted to see, and as cliche as that phrase is, it is what we're doing. You can, I think, go to the next slide. And then, and I also want to say that healing and wellness is a big part of our work as well. We've been hosting wellness workshops throughout the entire pandemic, recognizing that it has been a challenge to be at home. So integrating dance and movement, having classes like Soka Size, having classes like Bhangra, Bollywood dance, yoga, meditation, to integrate who we are as a community in action, even though virtually, just to make sure that people feel well at this time. And poetry as well has been integrated into our work. And so finally, we're really focused on building political power as well, and having to be creative about that too. So how do you do that during times of COVID? Obviously, we've been virtual in the way in which we've been doing things. We've hosted several voting one-on-one workshops where we've talked about voter suppression. You can go to the next slide too. Next slide, yeah. And you'll see here we have promoted voter registration in our community. A lot of times voter suppression happens at the very poll booths. You'll see to the right some of our members and our leaders who are poll site workers, to ensure that they are there when elections are happening, to ensure that the people that we see at the polls who are staffing these locations are reflective of our communities. We've been going to faith-based institutions to encourage voting, registering, because historically the South Queens community, many of the South Queens community, and I speak a lot about the Indo-Caribbean community specifically, they're not politically mobilized. And so what are we doing to change that? What are we doing to shift the narratives? And you'll see in the middle picture, that is us having a sign holding event right before the presidential elections to call attention to Donald Trump's potential re-election, and ensuring that our people were seeing us on the streets making noise, and making sure that somebody who is not as misogynistic and racist and bigot as him get reelected. We've also been hosting ranked choice voting sessions to ensure that people understand this new way in which to vote. I will say also too that while this is not an overt project of ours, we want to underscore that when women are elected to political office, women's issues are centered, right? We know this. Today, I was reading the news and I saw that in New Zealand, there was a passage of the paid leave for women, for people who just experienced miscarriage. And it makes me think how much further we as America have to go on so many levels. We're nowhere close to being there yet. And then, finally, and there's not a slide for this, but as an organization, we're thinking through alternatives to the criminal justice system and how we actually create community accountability. Because we know that these institutions have been harmful to Black and Brown communities and have actually put survivors in danger. We know they don't protect us. And yes, I remember one of the individuals who tuned in earlier said that the police and the court system actually function to re-victimize us. So what are we doing to create community-based interventions so that we're not in that position where we feel like we have no choice but to call the cops? What are we doing to ensure that government shifts from thinking that the first responders in cases of gender-based violence should be cops, right? So I know there's local organizations like Daisy's Rising Up and Moving that are working through this and learning how to train community members to intervene in situations like this. And then finally, what does it look like to advocate for legislation and policy that actually supports survivors? We as community-based organizations through this entire pandemic, honestly, we have been bearing the brunt of so much with such limited resources. And we need government to step up meaningfully for survivors. I will say that gender-based violence is the #1 feeder into the New York City homeless system. So what are we doing to ensure that survivors have a safe and a welcoming place to stay, right? How do we strengthen the domestic violence shelter system so that survivors can stay as long as they need? Right now, they're time limited out. After a certain amount of time that a survivor spends in a domestic violence shelter, they got to leave and they have to go into a general population shelter system. That general population shelter system is not safe. It is very dangerous for anyone that lives in that shelter system. So what are we doing to create those robust mechanisms to ensure that survivors have what they need? What are we doing to ensure that the rental assistance vouchers they're given are adequately valued at what housing actually costs, that they're actually useful? Government has resources, but what are we doing to make sure those resources are useful? And also, I'll say this too, what are we doing to ensure that those who are perpetuating the violence are held accountable, but also shift their own behaviors? Again, that doesn't rest on us, but we do have to address the toxic masculinity that exists in our communities, because we also know that it takes a certain amount of time for a survivor of violence to actually leave that person's abuser. And so we have to grapple with all these questions, and it is not easy, but South Queens Women's March is built. We're building a movement. We truly are building a movement across intersections. And I just want to close by the last slide is just asking you, well, that's the next slide, just asking you all who are watching to join us, join our movement, be on the front lines with us, visit our website and get involved. And I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you for your years leadership and just all you've gifted us tonight with this demonstration of what the work can look like and how concrete it is to do this level of work and to take to the streets, to speak out, to do cultural intervention, which is what I see you all doing. And also that leads to advocacy, right? And leads to legislative change and leads to systems change. And what you just started speaking about also was like this liberatory framework around how we actually get our communities free and what safety looks like, because right now it is all questions. You just asked us all the questions, and it's all questions. The movement is asking questions. We're asking questions to find ways to navigate. Right. So thank you for that. And I want to invite our Rock Council to come on with us and to share some of their strategies. Like, what does that look like in community, right? What is what Amintha just said, what Kanisha has shared with us, with what Shavana has shared with us, with what Denise has shared with us, right? With all of the community organizations, what is available to us in terms of how we implement, right? How do we actually bring this to the forefront of our communities? And how do we say our community organizing, our cultural development, all of that is violence prevention? So I'm really excited to invite you, Far Rock Greek Council, to share with us and help us close out. And we'll do one last closing after you all share your work. But please join me. Looking forward to hearing about the powerful work that you each do.
Thank you. I firstly want to thank Assemblyman Khalil, Shavana, and Monet for inviting me to speak at this event on behalf of Farakwe Greek Council. My name is Adugo Chukwu, and I'm the secretary of our organization. And I also want to thank everyone who spoke such powerful words today. So the aim of our organization is to unite the Rockaway Peninsula using service, civic engagement, and scholastic opportunity, and to inspire the youth and elevate our community. We hold a weekly food drive and annual events such as our back to school drive, Thanksgiving food drive, community cleanup, and various panels. Our Greek letter organizations pride ourselves in uplifting the Black community. We join our organizations to have a platform to speak out on injustices in our communities and advocate for safer spaces and more opportunities. Being a part of my own organization, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, has allowed me to pioneer spaces for women to share their stories and advocate for Black women overall. Farakwe Greek Council has created a safe space for members to engage with the community through outreach and service, and we also created a space to have tough conversations about the negative things affecting our neighborhood. With the help of FRGC, myself and the other women in our community can create a sister circle to continue building a support system. By coming together as members of the council, we can amplify the voices of survivors of assault and violence. Unfortunately, we do hear stories about male members of Black Greek letter organizations engaging in sexual assault and violence against women. I do not know the statistics of this, but I can attest that assault against women is something that has been plaguing the Black community, regardless of whether or not someone has their letters. FRGC hopes to change this narrative so that Greek life doesn't continue to be related to rape culture. So in order to push towards a better tomorrow and safer space for women, we are planning an anti-violence event series. It will be 3 days of events where we will inform the Rockaway community about protecting our women and anti-violence tactics to create a safer community for our women. So the first event will be a panel discussion. We will invite advocates, self-defense instructors, HR directors, police officers, and social workers. They will discuss the different types of sexual assault, verbal assault, and coercion. They will also discuss what sexual assault can look like in the workplace, the effects of assault on our physical and mental well-being, how to prevent it from happening, how to spot assault and how to approach it. And the purpose is to hear from people most educated on the matter and inform the audience on how to protect women from these situations. The next event will be a workshop for men or an etiquette class. We will discuss the many ways sexual assault and violence can happen. The men will act out and work through various scenarios where they will discuss inappropriate and appropriate ways to handle different situations. The purpose of this event is to inform men of the impact of their actions and to teach them how to protect women better. The last event is a self-defense class on the beach for women. So FRGC will collaborate with the officers of the 101st Precinct to put on a self-defense class for women of the Rockaway Peninsula. The 101 Precinct can connect us with a self-defense instructor, and at this event, we will sell self-defense kits with tools such as pepper spray and self-defense keychains. We are looking into having these events donated from a kit vendor. The purpose of this last event is to provide women with the self-defense skills. If anyone would like to collab on any of these events, please reach out to us. And lastly, FRGC will be having a virtual panel to celebrate Women's History Month. Some of the panelists include Selvina Brooks Powers, Monet Schultz, and Kiara Harris. You can check us out on our Instagram page for more information. Thank you.
Wow. I mean, incredible work that you are doing, and just so many opportunities for the community to plug in and to do all that we just described in action and in collaboration with you. And so incredibly grateful for the ways that you are just mobilizing, you're activating community, and also providing resources and tools. I hope that each of our partners will find a way to collaborate with you and to work together. And if there are community members who are watching and listening and bearing witness who want to find a way to plug in, please do say so. I know that at this time, as we close, we are going to see if there are any questions from the audience or from folks who have been in community with us for the last almost 2 hours. And as you think about questions, I just want to take 2 minutes to allow us to come back to ourselves, just in the same way that we did when we started this conversation. And it just means regrounding oneself, taking a deep breath, right? Integrating all that you've heard, all that you've learned, all that you have resonated with, all that has drummed up a pulse within you, and being present to that, right? So if you can, close your eyes where you're at, find a comfortable seat, and breathe in just all this wisdom and brilliance and your own lived experience that has found itself in the very essence and vibration and frequency of this conversation. And permit yourself to exhale and release anything, all of the things you've been holding, all you've been able to build and grow and manifest and integrate in this call, which has been profoundly powerful and beautiful. Come back when it feels right. Which can mean opening your eyes, turning your camera on, brightening your screen. And I will turn to the team. If there are questions that we should be fielding from the audience, please let us know. And if there are not, we will close on that note, but just waiting, a beat, a pause for any questions coming in. Final reflections from the audience.
That was beautiful, Savannah, and thank you so much. And we're monitoring the social media comments, and we've been able to. Good evening, everyone. Coming back from grounding. My name is Monet Schultz, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Assemblymember Anderson. We're fielding the questions. We've been able to highlight some of them during the programming, and I just want to congratulate everyone for a successful Safety for Our Sisters anti-violence and workshop installation. And if the assembly member would like to say a few words as we wrap up, if we don't have any questions, that would be perfect.
Thank you, Monet.
Yeah, I took a bunch of notes because there was so much to learn in tonight's workshop. And as I said, when I kicked off tonight's programming, as a cisgendered male who has power, it's a space of privilege that I need to step back, listen and learn, and hear women of color, listen to their experiences. And that's what I hope that my constituency and people who are looking on our social media pages tonight did, right? Take a step back and analyze what we can do better to make spaces safe for women, what we can do to make spaces safe for our sisters, right? What can we do to make spaces safe for our community? And so I'm super grateful for Savannah, who worked overtime tonight to really bring this program to the living rooms of our community, to the kitchens of our community, to the computer spaces, wherever folks are watching our program tonight, to our community, to also let them know that there are resources here to help them and to support them. There are programs, there are groups, there are coalitions that are building all throughout our community that are here to build, support, and uplift women. We had an incident, I think it was a week or two ago, where a young woman who identifies with a trans experience decided to run away, decided to leave community, which was home, because she had no support. She grew up in a Caribbean American household and had no support in her experience. And so these are the stories that we need to uplift. These are the stories that we need to treasure. These are the stories we need to help move our community forward with, by helping them connect to resources and connect to people who are going to support and love them, as the groups and organizations you all described, all your work that you do would be able to support and uplift young women who are faced without spaces of community and spaces of support. So I'm so super thankful for everyone who is here tonight. We're going to also make sure that this video is available on our YouTube channel, so that way people who weren't able to watch live and are struggle with the technology can just be able to click one link and relive this experience that we had tonight to really share and be in space with community. So again, I'm so super thankful for Team Khalil for the work and making sure that we organized tonight's event. So super thankful for Black Women's Blueprint, for Far Rockaway Greek Council, for South Koreans Women's March, for Jahaji Sisters, of course, for Cis Non-Cis, and the Justice Center for being here tonight to be a part of building community. I'm so super thankful. This will not be the last time that we're building. We will be out in the streets with you. My office will be super engaged with the work that you're doing, and we're looking forward to that work. So thank you so much.
Gratitude. Thank you. Good night. Be well.
Goodbye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
member.
Watching.